Hi, I'm Tom, coming to you from Cleveland, Ohio. Thank you for selecting this video. In today's video, we will talk about how to maintain your starter. There are plenty of videos out there that talk about how to create your starter, but there are very few that talk about once it's up and running, how do you maintain it? So there are some little tricks and tips that we'll cover today to help you efficiently maintain your starter. So there are different ways to keep your starter. Some people keep it in the refrigerator and they feed it once a week. Some people keep theirs on the countertop and they feed it once a day. That's the process that I follow. I actually keep mine on top of the refrigerator. It's a little bit warmer up there. So let me grab my starter and we'll talk about how I maintain it each day. So as I said, I keep my starter on top of the refrigerator. It's about 77 degrees Fahrenheit up there. That's about 25.3 degrees Celsius. That's really almost a perfect temperature for a starter. Typically, I try to shoot for around 76 degrees if you can find a spot in your house. It's the middle of winter here in Cleveland, so I keep it on top of the refrigerator because it's a few degrees warmer up there than it is on my countertop. So the first thing is just figure out a spot to keep your starter where you can be at the desired temperature. Mine happens to be on the refrigerator. The second thing you have to do is figure out what kind of vessel do you want to maintain your starter in. Some people use plastic jars, some people use glass jars. I found these 1-pint ball canning jars to be perfect for this. I maintain 50 grams of starter, and then each day I add 50 grams of flour and 50 grams of water. So I basically have 150 grams of fresh starter in here every day. That's where the blue rubber band is. And then it rises and falls each day with my feeding. But this, it fills your vessel up, I don't know, about maybe a quarter to a third of the way. If I use this 1 pint, which I think is about 400 milliliters for using the metric system, which I also prefer. So I use these ball jars. These typically come with the 2-part metal cover, which I don't really prefer. You can buy these separately. These are plastic screw-on covers. I love these. I use these all the time. I keep things in my pantry. I keep all kinds of dry goods in these. Very handy. And the nice thing about these also is that because it's a straight jar, it's very easy to get your spatula or spoon down in there, as opposed to the typical ball canning jar, which has the narrow neck. This is the wide neck version, wide mouth version. I strongly recommend this. Some people also use jars with the clasping lid, the metal clasp and the rubber seal. Let me grab one of those. This is another option people used. I used this for a while when I first started. I thought this was a good idea. I'm not crazy about this because the mouth is smaller than the size of the jar. So it's really tough to kind of get down in here under that neck when you're mixing up your starter. It just gets really messy around the lid. These are also somewhat convenient. This is a special, it's called a Fido fermentation jar from Italy. And these are nice because they have this rubber seal on them, or silicone seal. So you can actually seal this jar completely using this clasp. And when it builds up pressure inside here, it'll actually off-gas the CO2 through this seal. This gasket is specifically made to do that. These are for fermenting sauerkraut, which gives off tremendously much more CO2 and gas than your yeast does, and these do not explode under pressure. They're specifically engineered for that. If you're into that type of thing, these are okay. I'm just not crazy about it because they're hard to clean out. Some people use plastic jars. If you're keeping your starter in a plastic jar, I recommend using a food-safe jar or a BPA-free plastic so that you're not getting undesirable chemicals or off notes into the flavor of your starter. So I just use glass. So that's the vessel that I use, and I use this screw-on lid that you can buy separately. So I keep this on top of my refrigerator. I feed it every day. As I said, I use the 1-1-1 feeding ratio, which is equal parts remaining starter, flour, and water. So what type of flour do I use in this? I follow the recommendation in the tartine bread book. This is kind of my go-to recipe. It calls for maintaining a starter of 50% white flour and 50% wheat flour. I use King Arthur unbleached white bread flour and the King Arthur whole wheat flour, and we need 350 grams per week. I like to mix this up once a week. You could do a larger premix if you want to. For me, it's just a nice routine to do it on the same day each week. So the way I do it is I just take one of these plastic containers. These are I don't know what these are, 4 cups, 1,000 milliliters, basically, plastic containers. So I use my scale. I weigh everything in grams. I strongly recommend weighing all of your ingredients in grams. Don't try to convert to cups. Don't try to use conversion tables or the internet, because they're unreliable when you're trying to convert from cups to grams or grams to cups. The only way you can really be exact is by weighing your ingredients in grams. I go through this in detail in my other video. So we have exactly 175 grams of white flour. And to that we will add 175 of wheat. Which gives me 350 grams of flour. It's exactly what I need for 1 week. And then you would say, well, why am I using this big container when I only filled it 2/3 of the way? Because I need to mix this, so I leave room in the container, and then I shake this up so I don't get white on the bottom and wheat on the top. Shake, 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 turn a little bit like this, a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and I have a perfectly mixed blend of white and wheat flour, 50-50. I keep this on my counter, and then I feed my starter once a day with that, and I replace this once a week. So that's what I do with my flour. The second ingredient in your starter maintenance is your water. I go through in great detail in my other video about what types of water to use in your starter. The main thing is you don't want to use chlorinated water. So you ask people what type of water they use. They'll tell you they use tap water, they use well water, they use distilled water, they use spring water, they use bottled water. The main thing is whatever type of water you use, just take the chlorine out of it. So if you're using tap water, you can either filter the water out or you can boil it off if it's chlorine, but be aware that there's another type of chlorine called chloramine that doesn't boil off of your water. You have to filter that out. So find out what's in your water, and if there's chlorine in it, make sure you take the chlorine out. That's the main thing. So I have my flour, I have my water, and I have my starter. These are my 3 ingredients for my daily feeding of 1, 1, and 1 ratio. So of the 3 ingredients, I begin with my starter. So the first thing is I need 50 grams of starter, and because I feed this every day, I have to discard because I'm not baking every day. So I discard 2/3 of this, so I leave 50 grams behind. And this is often confusing. I don't know if it's confusing, it's just wrong in some of these recipes that you'll see about maintaining your starter, where they say discard 80% of your starter each day or discard half of your starter each day. If you're doing a 1-to-1-to-1 feeding ratio, you should discard 2/3 of your starter each day. There's 150 in here every day, and if I want to get back to 50, I take out 2/3. I don't know where the 80% comes from. The math just doesn't work to me, but people use that all the time. You discard 2/3 of your starter, you maintain 50 grams in the jar, and that's what's your starter for the next day. So people often ask the question, should I use a clean jar every day? Should I clean out my jar every day? You have a lot of options here. The main thing is you don't want a lot of crust and gunk building up around the edges of your jar, because if you're going to get mold growing in your starter, it will almost always start around the edges where that stuff is caked on the sides. So this jar, I scrape it down every day. This is starting to get a little crusty around the top. I don't like the way this looks. So I'm going to do a fresh jar. So I keep a whole stock of these. I don't know how many I have. And that way I can, trade these out every day. So this is an easy one because I need 50 grams to go forward. So I'm just going to pour out, and you can see my starter is pourable. This just happens to be my consistency. Results will vary with different people's starters, but mine, after it sits for 24 hours or so, it is pourable. Kind of like a batter. On hotter days it's a little thinner, cooler days it's a little thicker. So I'm just pouring, pouring, pouring. Exactly 50 grams of starter into my fresh, clean jar. Now this remaining starter is my discard. So what do you do with this? There are a million things you can do with discard. There are all kinds of recipes on the internet. You can make discard pancakes and waffles and English muffins. You can fry this in a pan and just eat it as is. If you want to do that, there's all kinds of ideas. In fact, on the King Arthur bread website, there are a lot of recommendations on there for what you can do with your starter discard. I tried some things like that, wasn't crazy about them. So I actually discard this every day. I don't wash it down my sink. You don't want to do that because it's like cement. What I do with mine is I add it to compost. So we grow our own garden outside, so we need a lot of organic material. So for me, I have no problem each day adding basically 50 grams of yesterday's flour into my compost bin. It's just wheat and water, adds a little nutrient. Try to scrape that out as best I can. That goes into my compost, and people say, oh my gosh, you're wasting so much flour by doing that. You can reduce your starter and you could do 25 grams a day. Some people do 15 grams a day. I don't really view this as waste. I'm viewing this as fertilizer for my garden. And this costs, I don't know, what, $1 a month or something like that is what I'm discarding here. So do whatever you want. I just happen to put mine in the compost bin. That works for us. So I have 50 grams of starter. That's the first one in my ratio, 1 part starter. The next thing I need to add is water. I just use filtered water out of my refrigerator. So this is municipal tap water that's filtered, so I've taken the chlorine out of it. I don't warm this up to anything other than how it comes out of the refrigerator. I just don't think that's necessary. Some people could. I zero out my scale and I add 50 grams of water. So now I have 50 grams of starter, 50 grams of water. Some people like to mix these two together. I'll do a little bit of that, and you make kind of this yeasty starter milkshake. I wouldn't drink that, but that mixes the starter and the water. And then the last thing I add is the flour. 50 grams of starter, 50 grams of water, and then 50 grams of my 50-50 mix that I just made. I zero out my scale. 22, 46, you get pretty good at this. 51, I'm gonna go with that. Now that I have all 3 ingredients added in here, I'm gonna mix this pretty vigorously. So you wanna I like to really stir this up, because you want the yeast and the microbes, the lactic acid bacteria, to make contact with as much of that flour as possible. You don't want clumps of them in here. So I mix that up pretty thick. And then this is the important part. I have this really cool spoon that's like half a spoon and half a spatula. I think it's actually called a spoonula or something like that. And then I can scrape down the inside of my jar really nicely. Keep that clean, scraping down the inside. You don't want that dried stuff on the sides. That's where trouble starts. That's where the mold likes to, if it's going to find a way in, that's exactly where it will find a way, is in those scrapings on the side. And then I like to take a towel or a paper towel and really wipe off the threads around the lid also, because that really gets caked up. So here's my starter. The only thing missing is my rubber band, which was on my old jar, which I'm going to wash now. I take my rubber band and I put this so I can see where I started. I like to use this blue rubber band or something kind of dark colored so you can see it from across the room, because traditional rubber bands are the exact same color as your starter. So here I can see. And then the last trick is, do you seal it or not? It's the last question. You should seal your starter because you don't want fruit flies or other things that are in the air getting in there, but you don't want to seal it airtight. If you seal your starter airtight, number one, it does give off gas, and if you have a metal lid on here, theoretically it could break the glass. But also, if you let a little bit of air in here, all the microbial activity that's happening in here is anaerobic. It means that it doesn't need oxygen to do that. But the lactic acid bacteria loves an oxygen-free environment. So if you seal this lid tightly, it will favor the lactic acid bacteria a little bit more than the yeast. So you want to leave a little bit of airspace. So you see people screw the lid on, it looks like they're screwing it on, but what I do is I screw it on and then I back it up like 1/2 of a turn. So I'm going to do it again. I'll demonstrate. Put the lid on, screw it on. It's on just hand tight, halfway back, leave some air. So nothing gets in, air can get out. Do it one more time. Put the lid on, screw it on, boom, halfway off, right there. That's how you want it. That's ready to go. This whole process, once I have this prepared, I get my water out of the refrigerator filter. I can do this in like 2 minutes a day while I'm making a cup of coffee or something like that. This is an incredibly quick process. It's also much cleaner than what I've done here. This is kind of a messy version of it, but if you really get this down, you want to be able to do it quickly. You want to be able to keep it clean. You don't want to have a lot of dirty utensils around. You can really make this incredibly short process. So that's how I maintain my starter. This goes back on top of the refrigerator with its thermometer, so I always know what the temperature is. Okay, it took a long time to describe a short process, so now I'm actually going to do the daily starter maintenance. I keep all my starter stuff in one place so it's all convenient. So here we go. My starter's on top of the refrigerator. I always smell it. This is my compost bag. I pour out about 2/3 of it. I have a pretty good eye for that, but I also weigh it. I know the weight of my empty jar, so I can tell by weighing the jar with the starter in it how much is in there. So I have 65 grams. I usually try to go for 50, but I don't try to be that exact, so I know if there's 65 in there, then I just reset the scale. And if I do a 1-1-1 ratio, I add 65 grams of water. I have my premix white bread flour and whole wheat flour. Reset my scale again. $66. Go with that. Stir things up. In the video, I said I do 50 grams of starter water and flour. I don't try to be that exact. I just pour out about 2/3, and then whatever's left, I match that with the flour and water. So I have a little bit more than 150 grams in here now. But over time, I average about 50 grams of each component per day. Stir it up. Then, important, scrape down the sides. It's good. Wipe this off. wipe my rim. Back on the top of the fridge. That's it.